we've never said no to a child, right? Like we're really, there's no, can't think of the word, but, that we are not saying, we take this child, but not this child. So I think in terms of the incredible diversity that the world is, I think that that's what we're showing. And I think that's what's still important is sometimes, maybe children who have more significant support needs sometimes are not allowed that possibility, of being in an inclusive setting. Sometimes just because of the separate silos, right? There's general education, there's special education, and sometimes they don't meet in the middle. And I think that that's what CHIME does is to, again, show that when we say all, we mean all. And, there's a learning opportunity for all kids. So there's this sort of civil rights piece, I think, that, has become really important.
Welcome to Matador Memories. I'm Annalisa Vanolia, and this week we're going to be talking about the history of CHIME Institute, housed here at CSUN. I'm here with my co-host, Carmen Ramos-Chandler, and Annie Cox, CHIME's Executive Director of Early Education Programs. First of all, Annie, thank you for coming.
You're welcome. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yay! So how would you describe CHIME to someone who's never heard of inclusive education before?
Okay, so the CHIME Institute was established in 1990 with the idea of developing programs that were inclusive. So inclusive education, that means children with and without disabilities learning together. So we started in 1990 with this mission. We have a lot of connections. We really started out of the College of Education here at CSUN. Do you want me to go into the history a little bit? So we started originally as a grant that was funded by the U.S. Department of Education that it ran from 1987 to 1990. So a long, long time ago. It was written mostly by Dr. Claire Cavallaro, who was faculty in the College of Education, specifically in the Special Education Department at that time. And the idea was how to support young children with disabilities in a typical general education program. The grant ran for 3 years. Like I said, at the end of the grant, CHIME became a nonprofit organization with this mission to continue on pursuing inclusive education options for all kids. In 1990, the preschool program started. We started our collaboration with the CSUN Child and Family Studies Center or Lab School here on campus, and we've been here since then. So a long history in terms of providing and educational opportunities for CSUN students. It started out with CSUN students in the credential program in the Early Childhood Special Education program, for example, those students who were, learning how to support young children. So the idea is let's learn how to support young children then in this inclusive environment.
I remember Claire telling me that we were teaching inclusive education and our students, CSUN students, were asking, show us, and we couldn't.
So I think that the demonstration part, being able to show what that looked like was the idea, right, when we first started. And I think it continues to be so. I think the idea that there's a place where CSUN students or university students can come and learn what they're learning in classes. CSUN, the College of Education, has been such a proponent of inclusive education. So to have those places to go has been, I think, really important.
How long have you been a part of CHIME?
So I started in CHIME in 1989. So I came in the last year of the grant. I had been a student here at CSUN in the master's in early childhood special education under the educational psychology program. Claire Cavallaro was my professor, and she was fantastic. I had, at that time, been working at the UCLA Early Intervention Program, and Claire called me and said, are you interested in this inclusive program? We need somebody we have one more year of the grant. And I didn't hesitate. She was such a wonderful role model, wonderful teacher, to all of us. So I came and joined CHIME in the last year of the grant, and I have have not left.
Can you describe what is inclusive education? Because the nomenclature for most people, inclusive education means we've got brown people and black people in the classroom. They don't understand what it means.
Right. And that's a really good question. I think that we talk about that inclusion means different things to different people. For CHIME, it means that we have children with varying degrees of abilities learning together, and we have the supports in place for all children to achieve their maximum potential. So children with developmental disabilities, children who are typically developing, children who are gifted. They're learning in the same environment, learning from each other with the supports in place. And that means special education, general education, teachers, service providers, supporting all children to learn. I think that piece about learning from each other is really, really important. Children don't only learn from teachers, but they learn from each other. Those social cues sometimes, that motivation for learning, a lot of the times come from other children. So that's, a really important piece in terms of this inclusive model.
I want to, if it's okay with you both, backtrack a little bit. I realized we didn't explain the acronym of what CHIME stands for, which I feel is perhaps a key part of explaining CHIME.
Okay. So, and a little bit of a history, the grant had a different, a very actually antiquated language for that, but CHIME became, CHIME, Community Honoring Inclusive Model Education. And those words were really, I think it was a conversation that we were having with families, with some of the parents who had been part of CHIME, putting that together. And of course, it fit perfectly. So that's what it means.
Yeah, I remember being in assemblies. I forgot the word for assembly. In assemblies, and we would have presentations on what the acronym means and what that means for how students should conduct themselves in the classrooms, things like that, about what the institution actually believes. I remember in the auditorium, the auditorium.
And Elisa, I think you're talking about the charter school,
yes,
right?
I am.
So a little bit, kind of going back to the history. So started with our preschool program in 1990. In 91, we developed our infant toddler program under the direction of Dr. Michelle Haney, also from the College of Education and Special Education. And there was a lot of interest from families, leaving the preschool program. So families, specifically families of children with disabilities, finishing preschool, and then where do we go from here? So the idea of continuing that pathway into an inclusive education and inclusive life, I dare to say. So in 2001, the charter school started. Again, a lot of work and a lot of collaboration with CSUN faculty. Claire worked, I remember Claire in her office, writing that initial proposal for the charter school. And then in 2003, so 2 years later, the charter middle school started, again, with a lot of support. So we had tons of support from CHIME. Our board of directors was mainly composed, so there was at least a third of CSUN faculty supporting us. We had families, and then we had community. We had a lot of support from the deans, over the years of the College of Education to really, get us through and establish the program. So we've been doing it now for almost 34 years, right? So we did not know at the time that we were going to be here so long. We always talked about at the beginning, if the world sort of caught up with CHIME, with what we were doing, then there wouldn't be a need anymore for the program. And here we are, right, over 30 years later, still feeling that we have a place in the world of education, to continue to demonstrate, best educational practices.
So CHIME started in part because of parents, but it's affiliated with LAUSD, so it's not this floating independent charter schools. The charter schools But they're just a component of the Institute itself, right?
Right. So under the CHIME Institute, which is the nonprofit, we have the early education program. So CHIME Preschool, our funding, we have a contract with LA Unified for our preschool program. And we are certified as a non-public agency for that. For our toddler program, we have a contract with the local regional center. So that's how we provide the services of supports in terms of funding for that program. And then the charter school is an independent charter school, but again, lots of collaboration with LA Unified. And especially at the beginning, making sure that people from this huge school district, were supportive of the program, and they have been since the beginning.
Is it hard? I mean, we're talking about the inclusive education model. That's a whole mindset shift from when we went to school, which was very segregated when it comes to learning abilities.
Right. There's been a lot of research now, and even then, in the late 80s, beginning of the 90s, there was some research, but more and more about it's about inclusive education. So not only it's the right thing to do when you think about, creating a world that is we all should be in together and learn from each other, but also there's some really good research in terms that it's really supports the learning of all children, right? All students. When it's done right, when the supports are in place, you're really individualizing them for all students, how they're learning. And I think that that's the idea when you have a team of professionals coming from different fields of education, to support the learning of students.
Yeah, I can speak to that as someone who went through the lab school through middle school for CHIME. That's something, when I speak to people about my experience at CHIME, the kind of education that I received at CHIME, a lot of times people assume that my education as a typical learning student was somehow hampered by the inclusion of neurodiverse students in the classroom, when the opposite is the case. I certainly never felt that I was being held back in any way. I quite enjoyed being given work that was tailored to me, and knowing that my classmates were also getting work that was tailored to them. And just, that was one of the huge misconceptions, when speaking about inclusive education to people who don't know what inclusive education is.
That's a really good point. And I think that individualizing is key. And I have to say, how proud I am. I've been here for a long time, part of CHIME. So one of the benefits is I get to see students growing over time and coming back and talking to us, students who have come back and are part of CSUN or have graduated. But this, what they learn from it, beyond, and I agree in terms of the academic setting, right? We want academics to be, the best that it can be. But also this understanding of diversity that is very different, I think, than most children get these days, or typically get into, because we do include, in addition to different ethnic backgrounds and cultures and all that, we also have this disability piece, which I think that it enriches all our lives, in many different ways. So I get to see now young adults coming back, and sharing the different ways. And I feel like sometimes even, what they're deciding to do in terms of profession and how their lives are being, lived. And I do think that it's very exciting to see that sort of the legacy, of CHIME over time.
When y'all first started this, did you think it would grow into a program that would actually have an elementary and middle school? Or did you just think it would be a teacher demonstration project?
At the very beginning, we didn't think about, and really the charter school is huge, right? It serves over 500 students every year. It has become, so we did not think about it. Here we were, a small demonstration project. Our preschool sort of continues to be this. So I'm so proud, of this, that we've been able to do that. Again, with the support, we couldn't do it without CSUN. The faculty continues to be super involved. We have this great liaison. We have been able to get the seal of approval a few years ago as a professional development school from one of the provosts from a few years ago. But we continue, I think our commitment to continue to learn, to continue to demonstrate and to share what we learn is really important because, we're not just then teaching children, but also teaching this, teachers. And that's really important as well.
Yeah, so CHIME has become an international model for inclusive education. I remember in elementary school, I think CHIME won an international award for education, and that was a big deal. I think I was in 3rd or 4th grade. But for people who, again, aren't familiar with inclusive education, what does that classroom look like?
So the classroom looks like a variety of children, some with developmental disabilities. So maybe you have a child who has cerebral palsy, who has mobility needs. There's equipment, right? It could be a special chair, a stander, a gait trainer. Maybe it includes a child who has autism, who learns very differently in terms of, the neurotypical peers. And then there children who are very typical in their development, and then maybe we have a percentage of children who are beyond their years in terms of their learning. So it's all of those kids together, and it looks, I think, maybe also a lot different in terms of the staffing. So that co-teaching model where general and special education teachers are co-planning, are co-teaching, are assessing children together. That's what keeps it, I think, real, right? That's what keeps, it's like, have you noticed this, about this child? We're always looking for, children who have same interests, for example, so that they can learn from each other regardless of where they are in their ability. But then you also tailor the lessons for where the children are. Again, trying to reach their maximum potential in terms of their cognitive skills, as well as motor skills, as well as social emotional skills. So I feel like you see learning in many different ways. You use that universal design for learning, talking about different ways to learn, to teach, and to demonstrate what you're learning as well. Not everybody is going to be very verbal, for example. Maybe you show what you learn in a different way, in a visual way, or, using something else.
I can just imagine as a parent thinking, this is amazing. And as a parent, I thought, this is amazing, but I can see someone who grew up and are sending their children to traditional schools thinking this is just chaos. What was the reaction? I thought when I enrolled my daughters into CHIME, they'd been in the lab school, and I knew how beneficial the environment was. Both of them were bright, and I just saw them thrive. But how do you explain to outsiders it's not chaos, but that in this chaos, amazing things happen?
There's a lot of creativity going on, right? I think that probably one of the first things that we need to explain is our philosophy and approach to families. We also partner with families very closely. That conversation, and that might look a little bit different from families that choose to go to a different type of school, or families sometimes are stopped at the office, or you only have 20 minutes to observe, or those kinds of things. But that families are part of that team. So I think that involvement and engagement with families makes a big difference. So we're also showing to families and asking them to share with us what they know about their child or children, so that we're all on the same page. So that engagement with families from the very beginning, I think, makes a big difference, so that they understand what's going on in the classroom. So a lot of, open door policies, right? Observations, parents are allowed to do all that, so that we can be, having those conversations from the beginning. And we're also creating a community, so not just children or students, but also families. And that's really important as well for everybody to feel comfortable and to make sense, right? Like if you say, if you're a true believer, right, that experience is to say, oh, I see it. It may look a little bit different in some ways, but I see the growth. And that's important in terms of the word getting out there.
When you talk to other educators, do they think CHIME is kind of a crazy, outmoded, weird idea?
I think that we've come a long ways, over more than 30 years. I think what might look still a little bit different is that we've never said no to a child, right? Like we're really, there's no... can't think of the word, but, that we are not saying, we take this child, but not this child. So I think in terms of the incredible diversity that the world is, I think that that's what we're showing. And I think that's what's still important is sometimes, maybe children who have more significant support needs sometimes are not allowed that possibility, of being in an inclusive setting. Sometimes just because of the separate silos, right? There's general education, there's special education, and sometimes they don't meet in the middle. And I think that that's what CHIME does is to, again, show that when we say all, we mean all. And, there's a learning opportunity for all kids. So there's this sort of civil rights piece, I think, that, has become really important. Another thing that I wanted to say, sometimes people talk about, well, it must be easy at CHIME because we have so many adults. That's one thing, that we hear. And I said, well, we have so many adults because of our collaboration with a university. So let us demonstrate that as well. And that has become, I think, for me anyway, in the last maybe 10 years, a really important practice that we share. We can show you how you can develop those, the collaboration with a local college or a university, finding common elements, right, of what you're teaching versus what's being taught at the college or university, so that you too can have, additional students in the classroom, because we do have, right, where this training piece where we have university students, sometimes undergraduate students participating in different ways. It means that we have more adults, but it also means that we have that responsibility to be teaching them. We have to create an environment where they feel supported. We spend time with them. There's meetings that they participate. So it's, the collaboration is, it comes from both sides.
Earlier you mentioned something, the civil rights component of what CHIME does. And it sounds to me, based on my years of experience as a CHIME parent, is that not only is the Institute and its educational entities, the charter school and the lab school relationship, not only are you serving as a teaching demonstration site of inclusive education, but the school has opened itself up to visitors. So if I'm from Denmark, I can come and visit, and I can learn. It's sort of like you put this little seed, this little plant, you're planting these little ideas that even if a person has a disability, they should be part of the community.
Yes, I think it's, and that's a philosophy, right? Like this understanding about human diversity and actually seeing it in action, that I think it's really important. So we have, people coming from different countries of the world. The latest collaboration at the charter school has been with Sweden, a school in Sweden, and they had some of their teachers and staff come to visit, and then vice versa. CHIME charter teachers are going to go visit there or have gone, a few of them. So, again, a wonderful partnership that way. But I think it's, again, this idea that we are showing that we all belong together, that we can learn, and this is, I think the demonstration piece continues to be important.
I'm going to ask this, you're not technically the guest, but I want to ask you, how do you think your experience attending CHIME shaped your view of the world and the people in it?
I will admit that's a little bit hard to answer because I only ever had that experience. I don't know what it's like for people who didn't go to CHIME. But I feel that because I was raised from 3 years old to graduating middle school, which was in 2012, how old was I? Around 14. From 3 to 14 in this environment with people of all different abilities, all different, just a wide range of people. Truly, CHIME is actually probably the most diverse classroom setting I've ever experienced. Growing up in that environment, I do believe did help me realize that, or perhaps helped me not learn that just because someone is different means they are dangerous or scary, because obviously society has a huge problem with different equals scary. That's the basis of all hate. But CHIME, we were taught the opposite, that different isn't bad, different is just different, and that's okay, and that we should all get along because we can. And I think growing up with that philosophy really shaped my worldview in a way that now with everything that I do try to approach people with empathy, regardless of who they are. And I don't know, I think if more people went to CHIME, the world would probably be a better place. So I really do believe that.
So how proud I am of you, right, listening to this. And that's one of the, research pieces, right? So for children who are neurotypical, right, like the benefits. So there are benefits for all of us in terms of, this opportunity, again, to learn together. So, it's great to hear such a great example in terms of of this understanding, being open to differences and understanding that. It's almost like after a while when I see, I mostly see the young children at CHIME, right, that are at the preschool and infant toddler program, is that very young children notice differences. They do. But we are there, they notice, and we talk about it, and, what we explain, they're fine. So that's the part, and continue rather than making a big deal. And I think that that's one of the things that we're hoping will change. Like when I grew up, like what you're saying, Carmen, we did not have people with disabilities in school. And I grew up in a different country, so it was even probably less than here, but very different upbringing, right? And then thinking that what is, like being maybe puzzled by somebody who maybe used equipment or talked differently or, had a specific disability. So that idea that learning from a very young age, what a difference that makes.
You helped start the Institute. How does it feel that you're looking back all these years?
I'm always very proud of CHIME. There was always a group of people who, rolled their sleeves, right? And Carmen, you remember, it hasn't changed much in terms of that, right? Like having a team together to make things happen. We just, there's still not tons of money that's available. We continue to do some fundraising for different things, but it's finding people to support the cause. And that's been, families who, for many years, I can go back to families who have left, right? The children are all grown and left schools that I can count on them, because I think, again, there's something about creating a community and feeling heard, feeling validated, feeling that you're part of it. There's a way, I think, to do that. And I'm not sure, I think that we had that in words, right? That was a part of our mission. But I don't know if we thought exactly what those steps would be, but we just open up, right? I mean, just being an open program, like I said earlier, the idea of that you can observe, that you can talk about it, that you feel part of the team as a family member, then that's the community, right? Year after year, we can count on people, to continue to develop that. So I'm very, very proud. I'm very proud of, the graduates over time. It's so great to see, progress and accomplishments. And, I feel like a proud now grandmother.
As CHIME has evolved, can you recall some times when you thought we've hit the wall? It's not going to happen.
I think that it was really hard to start the middle school. So think about it. 2 years after, so for the elementary school, it was we had to work so hard. We had to work on funding. That was our first event. Remember, and you might remember, Carmen, we had something here on campus. We had the support from Dean Phil Rusci at the time. Anyway, we are trying to raise money. We're trying to put all the things together. We kind of handpicked, who would be the executive director at the charter school, all those things together. But then 2 years later, we started a middle school. That was, it was a very young charter elementary school, and then 2 years later, that was, probably very difficult. Not probably, it was very difficult. I remember, and again, the support of, our board, our partners here at CSUN to kind of get through. So the charter elementary school, we started at a church site on Winnetka. And some of the classrooms we had to, Monday morning, we would put it together. Friday afternoon, we would take it apart and do it all over the following week. So we started small. We started, sort of that, again, a lot of effort from a lot of people, but people who are dedicated to, our mission.
I think people don't realize, and I know Annalisa never noticed it at all when she was at CHIME, but it has become, the whole program has become a destination that people want to be part of the community. And you get...
No, I can speak to that. My friend who joined CHIME in 7th grade, which changed her life for the better, she and her husband are making a point to stay in the area because they want their kids to go to CHIME. Because it was so foundational and so revolutionary for her to go from a non-inclusive education, that non-inclusive environment, and then to be able to transfer into CHIME and experience what education in our minds should be. She felt welcome for the first time, and she doesn't want her kids to go anywhere else.
See, that's amazing, right? I think that, again, there's legacy from, kids, right, who were part of this community and sort of where they are in their lives and sort of plans for the future. That's an amazing story, Annalisa, to think about it. We see at the preschool, right, the little ones, families who came there who are now parents themselves and sort of, that second generation. So it'll be great, to continue to see that.
When they're not old enough to have children of their own.
Hey, people can have children at a variety of ages, I'm eventually a few years down the line,
right.
maybe
thinking about it. Yeah.
I do want my kids to go to CHIME or a CHIME-like school for sure, though.
CHIME didn't have a legacy program, that's it.
Legacy admins,
Yeah, we have to work. I would love, we talked over the years about, again, reaching out. We haven't been really good about keeping in touch with everyone, in terms of alumni. But I think that would be a great way, in terms of reconnecting and, sort of bottling up. Of course, teachers have grades and, reports and things like that. But beyond that, what changes happen because of CHIME? Some of the things that you have shared today, Annalisa, I would love to quantify that in a way, put it in a bottle and say, but I think, for myself, it just, how much I have learned and continue to learn over the years, and those connections. But seeing kids, over time, that's the most important thing. Seeing their growth, seeing where they are, and seeing, kids shining, years later.
Now that's the emotional satisfaction. I'm going to ask you, over the years, what are the things that stand out to you that were like triumphs that you just celebrated?
I think that they were, like being recognized for a few things over the year. Like when the charter school first got the Charter School of the Year award. When Julie Fabricini was there.
Oh, Miss Fabricini! Oh my God! I remember her red hair. She lent me glasses for a Halloween costume once.
Those things. It's like, some like we had an award for a professional development school a few years ago. Those kinds of things. It doesn't seem like it's really important, but it is. It's like a little bit of a seal of approval and recognition from other people, but it's also a way to share what we do, like a little bit more of attention, about what we're doing, that maybe we'll reach out, other educators. We're continuing to do some training at the state level. We work closely with the Supporting Inclusive Practices project. We had it last year. We're going to do it again in the spring. So it's a team of educators that come from all over California, to learn from us. So they get to observe and they get to sit down and we share our practices with them. But I have to say, the more that I think about it, and I'm old, is that I think that actually seeing it breaks the barriers, because sometimes you can talk about it and, maybe, again, in your mind, describing something, you may think that even when you describe it, it might look a little bit different in your mind, but actually seeing children together, the ability to actually see it when you observe, I think that that's very powerful.
I remember a visit to the elementary school. And if you, as a parent, watching the children play, and you realize that they're playing together. When I was growing up, and I went to a variety of different schools, children who had disabilities were segregated. They were shoved off into a room, and the typical learning kids never saw them except when school let out. They didn't play together, the recess wasn't together, they didn't learn together. But you go to the schoolyard at CHIME, you go into a classroom at CHIME, there is no difference except maybe someone uses a wheelchair, someone uses a walker, maybe someone uses a sight board, a talking board. But it's no different than if someone has a blue jacket or a green jacket or is wearing sneakers and somebody else is wearing, loafers. It doesn't make a difference. The children are aware, but not.
Also, find me an elementary schooler wearing loafers. I don't know why that's a thing.
No, I don't know what the fashion is nowadays. Everybody wore sneakers.
And so inclusion education is never about children. It's always about adults. So it's about attitudes, right? So again, like if you can change, so that's our hope. There's newer generation of, kids growing up as part of a more diverse school or environment. That's, I think, that the change, because children, like I said before, even very young children are learning, how to get along, how to support each other, again, with the support from adults, obviously, but they don't have they don't have it in their mind that's good or bad. It's just different, and that's okay. So that's another piece of that research. It is about adult attitudes. And so if you can continue to change that, we're going to be ahead of the game.
Yeah, that makes sense, because the socialization at school only does so much if it's not reinforced at home. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because you don't want to be sending a kid to an inclusive education and then at home it's a hateful environment. Yeah, because it's counterproductive. Okay, fair enough.
How do you
learn
find
something
these
new?
adults?
Yeah.
How do you find the adults to work at CHIME in all aspects, not just at the school?
Yeah, so I think that it's, so that's part of this university partnership, right? We are giving the opportunity for undergraduate students to be learning early on. We're hoping that they will choose a profession, right? That they'll go into teaching, or maybe there will be an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, a speech and language pathologist, whatever, somebody in the field to come back and to do that. But I think we also, I think that the staff that we're choosing, they have to believe in the philosophy. Or it doesn't work. But I think that once they see how people help each other, there's always a team approach. I think that makes a big difference too. Sometimes being a teacher can be a very lonely position, So I think a lot of people are choosing, I would rather be part of a team supporting all kids. And I think that's, they have that experience in one of the CHIME programs.
Yeah, I mean, as a student after school, sometimes I would run into my classroom to try and, because I forgot something, so I went to go get it. And all the teachers for that grade would be, I suppose, having a debrief of the day. Now, I know that's what was going on. I thought they were all just hanging out when I was a kid. But now I know, they were actually working together to, okay.
Yeah.
It's been more than 30 years as you look back. I'm not saying you're retiring. As you look back, how does it feel?
It feels great, I think that CHIME is it's family, in many ways because of those long-lasting relationships, that we have with each other. It's pride, especially seeing children grow, like I said before, like you, Annalisa, over time and seeing where you are, I want to know about your plans. I want to know everything, but so proud of that. And, thinking that I hope that we, have had enough of an impact on the educational landscape. Because I think that's, when our founders, right, really that was what we set up to do. Every time I think about it, it seems like time has gone super fast, like I don't feel like when I say almost 34 years, it's like, how could that be, right? I guess when you're having fun, time goes by. But I think there's attitude of being a lifelong learner. That's another thing that you can pass on, being an adult and having this idea and pass that on to kids. I think that's important too. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm going to say thank you for joining us for Matador Memories. It has been a pleasure.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us for Matador Memories. You can watch and listen to more of our podcasts on the CSUN Conversations website and become part of the CSUN Conversations community.